Alright, so the colder climates are coming our way up here in the great Canadian North. Well, there's always those frosty mornings where you kind of have to slide the temperature control over to warm or sometimes even hot to get those thick frost off. Well, we're not at that stage yet. But then you notice that there's a bit of a very large odor of engine coolant. And quite possibly your windshield might even steam up. And then, of course, you try and wipe it off using either a rag or your shirt or your wife's bra. Anyway. And you smear the windshield quite severely. So that could only be one thing, and that is usually a heater core. So what we're going to deal with here is the 88 Olds. I'm going to show you how to change one of these in one of these Econo boxes from the 80s and 90s. They're pretty well the same. They're usually in the same location. Dash layout is fairly similar. Anyway, we'll go ahead and get started. You're going to need a trusty 8 mil, possibly even a 10. It's been a while since I last changed one of these. And yeah, if you're like me, you probably had an 8 or a 10 millimeter shallow socket. Well, good luck finding that. You have no idea where it is. So I'm using a deep socket. One of those things. Alright, so like I said before, they're pretty well straightforward. The only drawback is, like I say, you have to remove half the dash in order to get to one of these. But believe it or not, the full-size vehicles of the 80s are quite tricky, even though they are located under the under the hood in the engine compartment. It is quite tricky to get at. This here, even though half the dash must be removed, it is fairly straightforward. You'll want to leave yourself a couple of hours. Indiana County, Pennsylvania. I guess that's where I would have started noticing the smell of engine coolant. Nice area out that way. Anyway, so we're going to go ahead and start removing some items here. Like I say, there's quite a bit to remove. You have this kick plate panel. This has to go. You can even see a little bit started to drip. A little bit of coolant started to drip on the floor. You could even, at one point, you could really smell it even as you were driving, as you started the vehicle. So as soon as the water pump started to pump coolant through the engine, it was obviously leaking at the heater core immediately. So there's usually, GM has a little container where the heater core usually rests, and this is to prevent General Motors from getting sued. So normally under the hood of these vehicles, you might pop the hood and you'll notice that there's a little plug, a little tube coming out. Well, that's there to serve a purpose, and usually the coolant that leaks out of the heater core is supposed to come out of this tube and then just leak on the ground. So, which is better than having hot engine coolant trailing at your feet. I've had this happen with one of these particular vehicles. I had an 86 once, and that happened, and yeah, it was quite severe. So if you have a heater core leaking, you're going to want to fix that immediately, especially if you carry passengers. So anyway, we're going to go ahead. I lied. You're going to need a 7 mil socket. Obviously, this isn't not going to work here. So like I say, just grab an assortment of wrenches and start ripping and tearing here. Another thing to take note, we can kind of tell that this battery is stone cold dead. So it won't matter to me any, but to you, you might want to take the fuse out for the dome lights, because while you have the passenger door open, your battery is more than likely going to go dead after the few hours that this door is going to remain open. So fuses are located in here on most of these vehicles. Like I say, just something to take note of. Alright, so 7 mil, we're going to go ahead and get started here and remove all this. You might want to get yourself some little containers just to store the screws. Okay, so I counted 1, 2, 3, 4 screws. There's 5 over there. There's one over toward the accelerator paddle, and then there's this goofy looking outfit. It's just a twist off. It's got little tangs on it, makes it easier for you to turn, and it is on threads, so you know, you don't need any special tool for that. And there it is. It's basically like a wing nut. So that'll get rid of our kick plate. There's one there too. So, and just in behind the accelerator we have another wing nut, and like I say, these aren't very tight, so you'll be able to just reach over from the passenger side and start turning it. Like I say, it's coming out with no problems at all. There you go. Okay, so once you get the kick plate removed, just toss it in the back seat, and we'll restow that after when we're done. Okay. Now, here's where things get lovely. Alright, to gain a little more access, I'm removing the ashtray from the dash. There's two bolts on the bottom, and there's two up top here as well. Must have been a good weekend. Alright, so while pulling the ashtray, you want to definitely pull the fuse. It's just, you know, because the dome lights and cigarette lighter are on the same circuitry. So when you loosen up all the bolts here, you might find it difficult to pull the wire harness out of that. So just, you know, use a flat blade screwdriver to kind of just assist it, because, you know, my hands are too big to try and get it through that hole there to actually try and get it off. So disconnect the power for the, if I can get this bloody thing open, I can show you what one it is. There. It's this one here. It's a 20 amp. It's right in here. So, you know, just pull that, and it controls your dome lights. There you go. And your cigarette lighter. And don't forget to replace any bulbs that you might find along the way. That's definitely toast. Okay, so removing the dash glove compartment assembly here. I mean, it really isn't necessary, but I mean, you know, the more room you can work, the better. So for the 6 to 8 bolts that there were to remove the unit, yeah, I mean, you might as well go ahead and just take it off for just the sake of doing it. Save yourself a little bit of aggravation later. Alright, so any ductwork, we can tell that there's a pipe here. Now normally they just pull off, so, but try not to break it. If you need to use a screwdriver to just kind of break off the little bit of dust from 1988 on there, then by all means, but try and avoid not to break them. If we take note, it is fairly dark in here, but there is a little notch on top, which helps to hold the ductwork in. I'll show you that in a minute once I get this removed. Alright, so once the final fastener is removed, it'll drop right out of there. These are the notches I was referring to. We can take note that there is a little bit of a notch here, which helps the tubing to stay on the ductwork here. So, you know, just try not to, you know, manhandle it too much. I mean, it shouldn't give you too terribly much of a hard time. And the same goes for the other side. You don't want to break the tubing, you know, that's for sure, because then, you know, it's the dead of winter, and if you do winter drive one of these, you know, it's you know, you're not going to get heat towards your feet, and then, you know, your feet are frozen. And not only that, in the summertime too, you know, the airflow with the air conditioner is not even going to be functioning properly. So try not to manhandle these too much, because they are just vinyl plastic. They really can't take much. Alright, so continuing on, I removed this kick panel that's right underneath the accelerator brake assembly here. So like I said, there was only 2 bolts and then one of those wing nuts. So now sticking our head way in here, if we can take note, there is a fastener way up in this dark corner here, and it's a 7 mil. They're all 7 mils here. So like I say, once you get that, well, you're winning the battle slowly. I know it's hard to see, but if you can see, there's a little orange clip, and it just is shoved over top of the heater core assembly. Yeah, that's all it is. There's one there. I believe there's one on the opposite side as well. And we can tell that it is starting to move a bit, so we're definitely getting there with this. And they're not very strong clips, so you really shouldn't need a screwdriver. If you just turn them, you'll be able to remove them. Alright, so once you have that, you'll want to give this a bit of a yank, not too much, but you know, you have to force it a little bit unless there is another bolt. This is sealed off with some RTV sealant, so that black gooey stuff. Like I say, if you have nice carpeting in here, you might want to have some paper towels just in case it gets over your hands and then it gets on the floor mats and all that. We can take note, look at the coolant here. So like I say, oh yeah, so it's full of coolant here. So if you have some RTV sealant and a shop vac with the filter removed, you're going to want to grab one of those too, because that'll leave a stain. Alright, so once you have it removed, we can tell that was leaking for a little while. Actually, there's some corrosion here. So yeah, quite a mess, quite a mess. There's where our drip was, and now it's all over the carpeting. If you have a shampooer, well, it'll come in handy when the job is complete. So there is bolts up top, these little metal clasps, see here, that's what actually holds the unit in there. And you'll have to pop the hood. Actually, the heater hose might come through the firewall to a certain degree, so you know, it might give you enough room to work with. I don't believe that the clip-on type connectors with these, I think the heater hose just goes on over top. Oh, no more in a minute. See, to me, it seems like it's the old style where, you know, you just put a clamp over top of the heater hose, which is good because I don't have any tools to remove those specialty crap. And usually after you remove them, you know, the clips are busted and you're screwed anyway. So, those clasps, like I say, they just hang over top of the very edge of the base of the heater core. So, you know, the unit will be like this. Maybe it's like this, I can't remember. But anyway, so like I say, that's what will hold the unit in place. Now, with this cover removed, you'll want to rinse this off thoroughly, because once you restow all your fasteners and bolts, you might get the hint of the whiff of engine coolant still, and it could be just from, you know, this cover being, you know, soaked in it. So, you know, let it soak for a while and clean it up. Alright, so disconnecting the lines under the hood of the vehicle. There's two hoses here. They won't go through the firewall. I'm actually pretty certain that they won't. So just go ahead and loosen them off and remove the hoses off, and it'll give you a little bit of an easier time taking the heater core out. Alright, with both hoses removed, we can go ahead and remove the heater core. Alright, so the bolt that's up at the very top here, it's very tricky to get at. So I don't recommend removing it entirely. Just loosen it off enough that you can just let this metal hanger just hang out of the way. So there is like a foam kind of a gasket thing around the firewall. I guess it's just to keep moisture out or rodents or whatever. So you might have to, you know, fight with this a little bit. Probably better off to fight with it on the opposite side of the vehicle, the passenger side, and get more leverage. Alright, to make your life a little easier, this is that foam thing I was talking about. It's around the heater core tubing. Like I say, it probably serves a purpose to just keep rodents out. So like I say, it's only held in there by probably RTV sealant, and it just, you know, it will just come off of there. So you'll notice that, you know, it will give you a bit of grief trying to remove the heater core. This one's in good shape. This one just came off, no problem. So this one here was starting to deteriorate. So you'll have those there. You can even, if they're any good, left over, you can put them back on there, just to keep things from going in there. So you'll have to wiggle this around a little bit, and eventually it will come. Like I say, the tubing is bent and it goes up in here, so I mean, you'll have to move this a certain way and try and just play with it to try and get it out of the holder here. And with a few slight movements and a tip of a hat, it'll come out of there. So like I say, very corroded. This is probably what'll happen to yours, Harrison. So this is probably the original heater core that came with the vehicle, because that's what GM would put in their vehicles. Anything with in regards to climate control, that's what would have been in it. So we're going to go ahead and install this new unit, and everything is basically the reverse of the removal. Yeah, it looks messy right now. You got a lot of screws and bolts all over the place, but if you give yourself a good hour and a half, 2 hours, it's no problem. Okay, so it took a little bit of horsing around to get the new one in here. You might have the same kind of problem with this, but you know, at the end of the day, it's not too terribly bad. So anyway, we can go ahead and install our fasteners that hold the unit down. I kink that a little bit, the fins. Try and avoid to not do that as much as possible. You know, if it happens a little bit, it is what it is. And you have these little felt things still in decent condition. Go ahead and reinstall them. Alright, so any remnants of engine coolant that is in the vehicle, or even in where the heater core rests, you're going to want to get rid of that. So make sure you clean that up very well. You're going to smell it for a little while. You might think to yourself, is the new heater core leaking? Well, no, it's not, but you might get the odd whiff of it for a couple of miles, and it should go away. If you have a little bit of RTV sealant too, you can put some on this box and the cover, just a small film, just in case it does start leaking ever again. It's not going to scald any passengers, or yourself for that matter. Just something to think about. Next, reinstall the cover. Next, go ahead and install your hose. Alright, so finishing up a few bolts here and there, and we'll go ahead and put our ductwork back together, and the dash and everything else, and we'll go ahead and test the unit for any leaks. There shouldn't be any leaks in the heater core area. If there is, well, then there's a manufacturer's problem. So you could start the vehicle now if you wanted, just to double check and make sure that there is no leaks. But if you have any leaks anywhere, it'll be at the fittings where your 5/8 coolant hose hooks up. So we'll go ahead and put this all back together, and we'll test her out. And if you're lucky enough, after a while you might find a cat. That is interested in a box. So like I say, if you have pets, you want to make sure that all engine coolant is definitely cleaned up. You don't want your pet to get sick, because they are attracted to engine coolant. I have no idea whose cat this is, but I couldn't care less. I guess that cat isn't happy about the wages I was going to give him. So now, with that vent placed back in, we can hook up our ductwork. And like I say, it just clicks in there. You know, it doesn't take much. Next, go ahead and install your ashtray. Don't forget to hook up all the wire harnesses and change that bulb if it's burnt out. So, just a peanut bulb, 194 for your ashtray. I used to be able to do this single-handedly. Change the oil and check the tranny fluid, would you? Damn cat. Next, reinstall your kick plate. Alright, so once everything is back together now, you can start the vehicle, let it run for a while, check your reservoir. I mean, you wouldn't have lost much to take the cap off, so I just add a little bit in here. If you know, you lost a little bit, I wouldn't bother worrying about the radiator. Just add some to the reservoir, it'll be fine, unless you really want to take the cap off and just add some to it, but I don't imagine it went down in the rat any. So that's pretty well that. You want to clean up the mess that's been left on the floor there, because you'll turn your heater on and the air circulating on the floor, you'll definitely get a whiff of that. If you don't have a shampooer, just get some microfiber cloths and some water, try and soak that up as best you can, and test the vehicle. Let it run thoroughly, let the coolant circulate through the engine, and make sure that there is no leaks. Test the defroster, make sure that there's no smell. You might smell some faintly for a little while. If you let the car run for maybe 15 minutes, it should fade away. But like I say, if you continue to smell strong coolant odor, you're definitely going to want to have that addressed. If you happen to have a couple extra bolts left over out of doing a job like this, because there's about 30 of them on the floor pan, don't panic if it's about 1 or 2. If you have about 5 or 6, you're going to want to try and find out where they came from, because the cover that houses the heater core, if you're missing some bolts, when the blower motor is running, it's going to be very noisy. You're going to hear it. So if that cover is not sealed perfectly, you're going to hear a lot of blower motor noise. So just something to think about. You know, if you have 1 or 2 bolts left over, I mean, it's not the end of the world. I wouldn't lose sleep over it. But if you have way too many, you know, try and find out where they belong to. And once you get the engine running, I got a dead battery, so I got to, you know, try and get it running here in a second. Check your fittings here, your heater hose clamps, make sure that it is not leaking there. Usually when the water pump is running, it's not really going through the thermostat area as far as I can recall. So it probably will pump coolant immediately as soon as the engine starts. So you shouldn't have to wait too terribly long to find out if it's going to leak over there or not. So let it, like I say, let it run for about 15-20 minutes. Inspect it thoroughly, turn the defroster on, and make sure it's working out for you the way you want it. Anyway, that be that, lads. We'll catch you later. And oh, don't forget to dispose of your used parts properly, especially if they have engine coolant in it. Usually the back of my truck.